So I know a lot of the questions, I heard some speaker ask a question a few minutes ago regarding moonshots. And I can assure you, we will be covering moonshots, not just how to do a moonshot, but how to fund it and make it into a business. So jumping directly into our session, so we have a lot of time for Q&A with all the audience members. I'll directly go with my first question for Jack. And Jack, what is a moonshot? And who should pursue a moonshot?
Everybody should pursue moonshots.
Yeah.
Well, some of us, who's here this morning for moonshot craziness? Yes, okay, good. So we kind of covered what is a moonshot already, so I think we have a good sense of that. The one thing that shocks us is that more companies have not set up moonshot factories. This is really shocking. We invite people to come, we show them our methodology, we show them what we do and all the success we've had in graduating moonshot after moonshot after moonshot, and they don't set up moonshot factories. It's very startling to us that they don't do it. When you think of traditional corporate R&D of a large aerospace company or other interesting companies out there, they're really meant to further the core business. What's different about a moonshot factory, a moonshot R&D center, is that that's not the aim. We actually are expressly not focused on the core business. We're actually creating businesses that are outside that structure and moving ahead. And there's a lot of advantages to doing that. First of all, you have no competition with the core business and the new moonshot business, so it's actually a very positive engagement. A lot of times, the way innovation gets killed in companies, in my experience looking at it, is that the core business sees the R&D factory as impinging on them, competitive with them, and so they tries to kill the other. But when you do moonshot stuff, it's so outside the core stuff that everyone is happy to work together, and that's what we found. So what's really shocking to us is that more businesses, recently Telefonica, the large telecom out of Spain that has a global footprint, they just started a small moonshot factory. We're encouraging them along, we're giving them resources, we want them to go and do that.
Then should billionaires do moonshots, or it could be anybody in the audience?
Oh, no, everyone can be involved. I mean, I talked about X Prize this morning. Moonshots is not just for companies. The nonprofit X Prize, there's other nonprofits around who are engaged in moonshot activity. So, and they can engage a lot of people, including students. There's a lot of student competitions for moonshots. So it's something that a lot of people can get involved in.
Got it. Then Asha, you've invested in over 150 companies. Who do you think makes into a visionary entrepreneur or somebody who pursues these kinds of moonshots?
So I think for a lot of, for a really great entrepreneur, an idea strikes them out of the blue. Typically, it's not something that they've thought through incrementally. It is literally something that they wake up to one fine day and they say, and they're wedded, they're in love with their idea. And then they pursue it and they start digging into it, and typically, hopefully, you'll meet them soon after that. Those ideas are so radical and they're so out of the box that luckily for early stage VCs like me, most VCs actually don't get it, which is great because they're just not standard stuff, And when you see that, you just know that, and maybe it's just years of experience now, Hemil, but you just know that this person is going to do something great. It's actually very much like what these guys did in Founders Fund, which is you are really betting on the person and their madness, their passion, and their energy. And then what comes out of it, actually you don't know, but you know that they're going to. In fact, Luke can speak about that also after his PayPal and founder experience.
Yeah, no. So I think that's a great segue into Luke. You co-founded PayPal alongside Peter Thiel and some of the most wonderful individuals out there. When did you realize you were onto something special, and why these people?
Well, almost instantly when I met them. I went to school with Max Levchin, Urbana-Champaign. Also, Mark Andreessen was 2 classes ahead of us, so we got to play around with the first versions of the web. And Max, I instantly wanted to work with and do coding projects with. And then in Silicon Valley, fast forward a few years later, in 1997, I met Peter Thiel, and I also just instantly, we instantly became friends, and we didn't particularly have an idea we wanted to do together, but when Max came to Silicon Valley and asked me to introduce him to people, and I suggested he talk to Peter, and then I come into his apartment, he says, let's do PayPal together. It was just absolutely instant. Now, one thing that happens at the early stages sometimes is that, and for us, it's always been about the people. Well, actually, Max's idea in the beginning, it was elliptical curve cryptography-based security applications for handheld devices. I don't know if I could even have described
Sounds
it correctly.
too technical
Do you guys
for
remember
this
the Palm
audience.
Pilot, the non-mobile devices that they had? That was what we were working on. And Peter suggested we might want to do something with money. But I had already committed to them before we even had the idea of PayPal, because I wanted to work with them. I knew that this would be a great company based on the people, and then we evolved the idea together.
So, you've had the opportunity to work with really incredible and successful entrepreneurs, and you're one yourself. What are those qualities do you think makes an entrepreneur that's significant, that's special?
One of the most important things is the ability to persevere in the face of immense social pressure that is going to be telling you that you can't do this, you shouldn't do this, it's just weird, it's going to fail. You have to have the ability to keep going even when every normal social signal is telling you that you should not keep going. And for the kinds of entrepreneurs we want to back at GigaFund, we look for people who will keep going even for 20 years or more.
20 years or more, that sounds like a very long time. What is it that makes you commit for 20 years?
It's a great question. It has to be, you have to be doing it for some other purpose other than, you want to make a certain amount of money. Of course, that's an important motivation, or have some kind of fame or success. It has to be some purpose outside of yourself that you are driven to, that often it's that if you don't do this, nobody else is going to do it. That kind of sense, because that will keep you going when when everyone is telling you you should not, you're going to fail, it's not going to work, it's a bad idea.
Then we are going to go around the table and then do this 20-year run with all of you. So let's say 20 years from now, where do you see the future of computing, quantum, AI, Jack?
Well, let me just first build on what Ash and Luke just talked about in terms of this commitment, the focus, the long-term nature. And we were talking just before the panel about this also a bit as well. There's a problem right now in the tech ecosystem, both here in Silicon Valley, elsewhere. We have a mismatch between the problems that we fund to solve and those that we need to solve, right? So most venture capital, a good part of even angel investing, goes into problems that you can imagine some kind of return in a very near-term sense. And the problem is that you can't then tackle the really hard problems. Now here's the irony of that. It's not that the hard problems have less return. In fact, what I would argue, and I think a number of us would argue here, is that going after really hard problems with deep, deep moats of technology put you in a better position for return. Better IRR. And the irony is that that's not what people do. If you look at, for example, Tesla versus Fisker in the early days, which one attracted the longer term type of investor? Tesla did, because Tesla had a bolder vision, a vision of getting off gas completely. Fisker's vision was interim. We'll have a bridge to the future. We'll have plug-in hybrid first, then later. And so when both companies almost hit the skids, Tesla's investors said, we're here for you, we're going to re-up, and let's actually make this happen. The engineers also, in the main, stayed there because they came from a bigger, longer-term vision. So the vision actually, in my experience, self-selects the people and the kind of capital you get. If you have a vision that's midterm or near-term, that's what you get in people and money. If you have a vision that's super bold and super long-term, solving a really, really big, hard problem, you self-select for that. It may be harder to raise that money. It may take longer to find people to do that, but when you find them, they're with you. So I want to turn maybe to the rest of my panelists to also comment on that.
Yeah, so I want to just interject a point here. Like, as you said, I'm just going to put it in a nutshell. Everyone is funding short-term and small ideas, but no one is really focusing on the long-term big ideas. How do you bring that mindset change for the entrepreneurs and the VCs and everybody, I think, in the audience alike? How do you bring that mindset change? And I think you guys might have some insights.
Well, you need a lot of money. Because if it's really, extremely sort of exponential ideas, and they are, so let's say, for example, Elon Musk doing the Boring Company, right? I mean, that's a moonshot like we have never seen before. It's just like, we're digging up the whole earth and creating all this movement and all the traffic and, management and stuff like that. So there are a bunch of people like that those are rare entrepreneurs that our planet is blessed with, who can really think crazy, and luckily for them, there are good investors who can see them and who can latch on. The good news is, the bad news actually for us in the US is that it will cost us a lot. The good news in the developing world is it's actually very doable. And I'll speak about it later, but let Luke take it from here.
There's another aspect other than perseverance that's necessary to be able to build some of these extremely significant companies. And that's actually, you need to be able to preserve your capital. It's often forgotten. If you have a very short-term company, it doesn't matter as much because you only have 2 years you need to survive, or 3 years. But if you are trying to survive for decades, you almost have to have a Warren Buffett-like perspective about the preserving your capital and reinvesting your capital with very, very, very intelligently. So the kinds of people that we will look for, and I think the kinds of entrepreneurs that we need are those that they're not just they persevere in the idea, but they will also preserve themselves and not get diluted out. That's the personal reason, and not lose control of their companies. And this also will prove to investors that you are the kind of person that is willing, that is worthwhile to invest in for the long term.
Luke, let me just build on that. We also look for entrepreneurs and partners and people to hire who can say no. What I mean by that is, it's very easy when you're at a young stage of a company, even if you have this long, big vision, to get detoured by a potential customer who comes and says, hey, if you can just take your idea and just move it this way, down this track here, we'll pay you $5 million. Now, to a young company who's trying to preserve capital, they want to do the right thing, it sounds great. It sounds like the right answer is to say yes to this potential customer. But often the right answer is to say, thank you, but we can't do it right now. We can't take your $5 million. And that is a bit odd. And sometimes you're on the board. I'm on a board sometimes of a company, and I say to them, don't take the money. They're like, what? Don't take the money. And what that money would do is it would detour us completely. And it would take us down a road where we've lost now our attachment to the big idea and to the vision. And again, when you're in a board with entrepreneurs and you're going to fund something, be it inside a company as entrepreneurial or entrepreneurial on the outside, come to some general agreement. Take a retreat, go to Calistoga, go to Napa, take everyone for 2 days, and come to agreement what we're here to do. By the way, if you decide what you're here to do is just build something for 2-3 years and sell it to okay, that's fine. Then understand that's what you're in for. But if you are in it to solve one of the big grand challenges, food for the world, energy for the world, logistics for the world, electric cars for the world, one of these big, big ideas, then you have to commit to each other in a social compact and say, this is the North Star of our company. And that's how we're going to make our decisions.
But then isn't it that the VCs, whenever VCs get on board, want to change the management? Isn't this sort of their agenda?
Not a good VC. A good VC doesn't.
It's like a Dr. Reflex. Change management.
Right.
Change management.
My own bias. If a VC asks to change and get a professional CEO, something is wrong with that whole notion. I don't believe in it. Thankfully, my co-panelists are kind of on the same page. But I think those VCs might be more on the sort of, maybe flipping a company, having an idea of sort of getting an exit. Nothing wrong with that, by the way. Having an exit in the next 10 years or something. But some of us are just not built that way. And I would rather actually that I struggle about where the returns are going to come from than give in to flipping the company.
Yeah, this is one of the most important things I think we did with Founders Fund. That's why I called it Founders Fund. I came up with that name in 2004 before we even had the money. The vision behind it was to support entrepreneurs, and that's what I pushed for very, very strongly. And in its whole history, and my friends are still there and they're still holding on to this, they've never fired a founder. And I think other people followed us in that, which is very, very important, because the founders are the ones that drive the vision of these companies that make it possible for them to achieve true greatness rather than the short-term successes. And I hope one thing that investors will learn, and this is something I would say to the investors in the room, is that it really works out much better for you this way as well. Spending your time and your capital behind the companies that are not working out, and is much better spent for you to go find the next Steve Jobs in your portfolio or outside of it.
The way I see it also, Hemel, is as I see the founder as the idea, and the idea as the founder. And that is
Inseparable.
an energy that is a whole different ball game. And it's, we can only sense it. If you try and, create an Excel spreadsheet about that, it's just simply not going to pan out. So you need to have that kind of a stomach and perhaps an ability to say, this is how much I'm willing to lose if things don't go well,
Hey, well, now let me answer your question you asked before. Sorry. We wanted to really tackle this issue of the big, large problems that have great return, but for some reason, we in the Valley are not going after them. So we just wanted, I think, to surface that. And again, I'm not sure we have the solutions per se, all the solutions, but it is concerning that so much capital, both the financial capital and even more importantly, the fantastic human capital that we have in the Valley is not being funneled towards these big problems. So anyway, to note that. But to answer your question before about the future of computing, 20-year futures, things like that, I think it's going to be a fascinating time. I think we're going for hybrid computing. 20 years from now, it's always the case. If you go to the Wayback Machine, everyone here used the Wayback Machine? So if you go to Wayback Machine and look at these websites from 20 years ago, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe that was called technology. It looks ridiculous. But at that time, many in this room were like, yeah, that's the latest state of the art. So we must be in that same situation right now. It must be that what we have today is going to look ridiculous 20 years from now. But it's not just going to look ridiculous on its own. It's going to look ridiculous in the sense that the larger context of hybrid computing will really start to come to pass. What I mean by that is that today you have a certain architectures. We had CPUs for a long time. NVIDIA realized, wow, we can make these really cool chips for video games. And then we in the AI sphere said, wow, we're going to use those also for AI. And then TPUs came and all kinds of great chips. But that's still all within a very traditional, what we call von Neumann architecture. It's something that John von Neumann came up with now 70 years ago. But new kinds of architectures are coming. We think about neuromorphic computing, other kinds of computing. There's even physicists thinking about thermodynamic computing. If you have time on a Sunday or Saturday, look that up, and you'll be lost for hours and days, I'm sure. One of the areas that I commend people to think deeply about, and sorry to get a little technical here, is something called complexity classes. And this is something that you might hear about in an algorithms class, when you're in school. But what we're thinking about right now and what the next 20 years will bring to us is deeper understanding and insight about what is computable on what kinds of platforms. So if you are a drug company, Pfizer, Amgen, Genentech, and you have a drug combinatorial problem, you have 60 million potential compounds, and somehow 5 of those together will deliver some kind of drug, but you don't know which one, that's a runaway combinatorial problem, almost like a traveling salesman problem. Is that computable or not computable on different kinds of architectures? If you have other kinds of problems, it might be in other kinds of complexity classes. When we say complexity, meaning basically what kind of time and space resources we need to run and manage that problem. So we're going to have a lot of insights and a lot of interaction between the theorists who tell us about these things and the practical implementers who build these systems. And I think it's going to be a very exciting moment over the next 10, 20 years when we come to a better understanding of hybridizing our computation. CPU, TPU, GPU, quantum PUs, QPU, neuromorphic, NPU, maybe thermodynamic processing, maybe another kind of TPU. So this is going to be a much richer bath of architecture rather than just a single monolithic area.
So, let me touch upon a little bit what Asha said and what you said. Should then emerging countries even pursue moonshots? Is there hope for them?
I would say the opposite. Sorry, and then let Asha speak. But please, Asha, you go ahead.
Let me try and address that first. Absolutely, the developing countries must take these moonshots, and it's because they're not going to be as costly as they are here. Number one. Number two, I think the next generation of serious disruption in technological thinking and the power of technology is probably going to come from the Indian subcontinent, because as India awakens as an ancient civilization which understands that the world cannot be driven just by consumption. It cannot be driven by quarterly profits. It cannot be driven by the Wall Street. If that's the case, if that's where the fundamental question of what is a good human and what's a good life is then correlated to question of consumption. So if we divorce consumption from what are the drivers of technology, we will find that some of these biggest moonshots are going to arise from the Indian subcontinent simply because it's got the wisdom. The wisdom was buried till now. For the first time in my life, I'm seeing this wisdom arising in India. And I don't understand exactly why this is happening, but maybe it is the youth and the freedom that the youth is experiencing in India. So I actually do see some really fantastic, in fact, I've started investing in those now. I would say kind of with an idea that I'm going to lose the money actually, but with very little amount of money, there's the madness of these entrepreneurs is getting fueled. And
Luke, Jack, what do you guys feel?
About whether the developing world should fund these?
Yeah, do you think there's an opportunity for emerging countries?
I think that there is still something in the word moonshot that when you put it in your mind, you might be thinking of something very, very expensive where it has a very high chance of failure. And I want to point out is that perhaps at the beginning, great, entrepreneurial projects have a high chance of failure. But for the truly great entrepreneurs, they're risk minimizers. And as they get going, they are good stewards of the people and the stakeholders and the capital that they have, and they are not taking wild risks, actually. They're continuing to take calculated risks. So we should not have in our minds, because perhaps we do, because we imagine the astronauts dying in the Apollo 1 fire and all of these things at risk. And perhaps the Soviets could have gotten there first. When we think of the moon program, it's a high-risk program. But actually, a great entrepreneur is not taking massive and crazy risks. They're taking smart risks along the way, particularly as they scale up. And should we be backing these kinds of entrepreneurs? Should countries be supporting them? Absolutely. They should be giving them billions of dollars of capital, because it's a great way for us to solve the biggest problems in society, and at a low risk, not a high risk.
Luke, let me actually double down and let me underscore and agree with you completely. In our experience, when I say our in this case, it's both XPRIZE, 20 years of moonshots, 20 years of data now. This is not yesterday. This happened now starting 20 years ago, and more recent moonshot activity in the corporate context. The moonshot type of programs and initiatives actually have lower risk. Now, it sounds counterintuitive. But it goes back to what we talked about before. These programs attract a different kind of people, different kind of capital, different kind of backers, and different kind of customers. And because of that, you actually lower your risk because you have everyone bought in to that longer term vision. If you have a short term vision and you get into a bump in the road and your engineers are going to jump off the ship, then you have high risk. But if you're in there for the long term, like when you were starting Founders Fund, you guys, I'm sure, had a very long-term vision, what you wanted to do. I'm sure there were bumps in the road in the beginning, right? And Asha, you've done many, many long-term things as well. If your initial focus on India and now in Pakistan was a short-term thing, you'd be out of there within a year. But when you have that longer-term vision, it just actually mitigates risk because of the circles of people you put around yourself. So it is counterintuitive, but we now have a lot of data to demonstrate it actually lowers the risk.
So actually, Jack, to your point here, I really actually do want to, add something really important here about, when Larry Page started Google, it wasn't about just algorithms for a better search. It was for saying the world is deeply unequal right now. And is there anything we technologists we computer scientists can do to make the world a little bit more equal? And their thinking at that time was it is to give information in the hands of everybody. That's the first equalizing force. It was really a moral force. And you can see that in the execution of the company now.
So I think
and that kind of stuff, if it happens, I think that's, that makes history, right?
Sure. And I think we're almost out of time, but what I want to do is at least ask Asha and Luke these questions regarding our 20 years from now. Asha, you close quite a few deals a year. What is the next big deal for you? Where do you see the future?
I see it actually in alternative sources of energy, in mobility, a very different kind of mobility, which will be, it's not autonomous. Actually, it's much more individualized and almost free, shared mobility, and so I think those two, I would say, are sort of the biggest drivers of change. I think and the last one is going to be learning, where I don't see schools and colleges existing, beyond a few more years now, as they get repurposed into doing something, because learning is becoming individualized and it's become self-driven. So in peer groups, people can learn much better than and we have data now on that.
So then, Luke, if 20 years ago it was the smartphone that now we can't live without, what do you think is the next big thing which nobody is even thinking about in the broader population?
It wasn't the handheld devices that attracted, or the mobile devices. It was Max and Peter. It was the people. I knew I'd be friends with them for life, and I knew that whatever we do would be successful eventually. And that's how we think about things at GigaFund. Is the entrepreneur, is this founder going to build one of the most significant and transformative companies in 20 years? Not what thing is going to happen in the world, but is this specific person going to do it?
Definitely. And I think we are out of time now. Thank you very much, Luke, Asha, Jack.
Thank you,
This
Hemant.
was a fantastic
Thanks, Hemant.
fireside chat. Thank you very much.